Welcome to Bonehead Weekly, and it has been my privilege, but also my fault that we have been a year and a half of getting this damn thing scheduled. All my fault. I take full responsibility for having the great and almost the same age as me. He's 1 year younger, and we have so much in common, even though we rarely talk unless it's a show. Ray Coffman, artist extraordinaire. Welcome to the show, Ray. Thank you so much for doing this and taking the time, and thank you for your patience with us.
Hey, no problem at all. Thank you for having me. It's an honor, a privilege. I
Just
am
stop
excited to
lying.
be here. Yeah, man, I'm a terrible liar. I'm so
You're not
sorry.
very good at it, though. Especially the privilege thing is where you went a bridge too far.
Right. Yeah, it's like, wow, that was rehearsed. No,
Yeah.
but seriously, I am hard to nail down for time anyway because I'm busy with stuff. So it was partially you, it was partially me. The ships weren't syncing up, but we got it tonight.
We've got it tonight, and Aurora is takes up a lot of your all your extra time because, like me, you have a young son,
Oh yeah.
and they tend to want your attention.
Oh yeah. Well, for instance, tonight I was editing some keyframes and some pacing stuff for the show, and he really wanted me to draw some transformers with him to the point to where he was starting to kind of get upset. So I was like, you know what? I'm gonna shut it down for a few hours. I'm gonna go spend some time with him before he goes to bed. So you have that
Uh,
happen a lot, and he comes first before anything. So if he's like, let's spend some time together, this gets shut down, and I go do that. So you know how it is. So.
I
Uh,
do. I just James and I both. Well, I James, we were talking about this, but I mean, there's a long story, but I ended up taking a pay cut last year for numerous reasons. But one of the top three reasons was I can pick my kid up. I can leave work and pick my kid up after 4.
oh, that makes all the difference in the world, man.
It's tough because you want to make sure that you're giving them all their attention, but at the same time, you have this thing inside you that you want to create and get done, and it takes extra time because of the kid.
Yeah, well, it's a thing where there's a balance. Of course, I have a job too,
Yeah.
and so it's not like I'm just gallivanting or whatever. No, I have a job. I have husband responsibilities around the house, responsibilities to the house, responsibility to my kid. So when we got into this, I knew it was going to be a situation where I'm terrible with time management anyway, because I'm just a flighty artist with goofy ideas.
I never
And
think of you
so,
as a flighty artist, by the way.
oh, really?
No, I really don't.
Because I
But it
totally
may
am.
not that I may not be that I know you well enough, but I've never thought of you that way. You've never struck me as that way.
When
And
when
buddy,
I'm
we've met some flighty artists in this
Well,
business.
yeah, I know some for sure, but like when I'm at a show, and especially since I started the animation stuff, I really made a point. I was like, okay, this. You have to treat this as a job, a corporate job. If this is going to work, it has to be this. Because for years, I drew Aurora just when I could. It was fun, and then people started really liking it, and I was like, I got to put more out. But when I started doing this, I knew it would be a balance of time with work and home first and foremost. I was 35 before I found my wife and we got married, and then so I got started late. I never thought I'd be a family guy, but now that I'm a family man, it's the most awesome thing. I can't even imagine life before my kid and my wife. So now it's like I prioritize things differently, but it's weird because when you start a project, your brain thinks, "Oh, I've got all this time," because your brain is still on like bachelor time. I've got all this time when you really don't. And my wife was always like, "No, you don't have that much time. You got to schedule it this way." I was like, "Oh, I keep forgetting. I've been in this for 10 years. I keep forgetting."
No, it's extremely difficult, and I appreciate that because a lot of people will ask us, well, because there's a lot of we just had Charles Band, who's he owns Full Moon Entertainment, and he's been in the business for 50 years, and we were talking about something, and I was like, there's oh, what was the word? It wasn't producers, James, but it's the other one. It's entrepreneurs. And what it is, part of it is that there's a lot of people that talk about what they're going to do, but there's not a lot of people that actually do it. So when
Yeah.
I work with college students, and so does James. And my advice is you'll beat 50% of your competition by showing up.
Hmm. Absolutely.
Now, don't get me
That's
wrong, that other 50% is going to be tough, and then there's another boss. but 50% of it is just people talking. They don't actually do it.
Right. You have to actually get in the game to
Hmm.
compete. And so like a lot of times, like I was a lot of talk for a long time. And then I just met a few people and I got started getting along in years. When I was in my early mid 30s, I was like, you're doing it now or you're not doing it. I had a conversation with myself. I was like, look, you've been talking a lot, a lot of this, you got to get to it or shut up. And that's the conversation I had with myself.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it had to be real, it had to be hard, it had to be honest. And since that day, I slip up sometimes, but it's like we are always on task.
Yeah.
And that's the big thing. You just have to, every day is not going to be great. You're going to slip up. You're going to have days you don't want to do it. You got to park yourself at the desk. You got to get the first few minutes of work in and then let it flow. But it's like going to the gym, right? Nobody has a problem once they're there, but you got to get there.
Hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's always been my thing, just get there, sit yourself down at the seat and start working. And I love working. I love the work of things. I like building things. I like doing things. I like doing work where I see progress. When I was in retail, I was always the guy that asked if I could put the displays together and stuff because I had to see things being done.
Yeah.
That's how I've always approached this whole thing too. So,
Well, I'm curious. So, like we do oftentimes on Bonehead, and James, anytime when you have a question, just go ahead and interject. But I'm curious because you and I are almost the same age. I'm a little older than you. But what was the thing that got you drawing? So a lot of times
um,
we ask writers, directors, actors, what was the bug that bit you? What was what got you drawing?
when I was a kid, I was a big Transformers, Ghostbusters kid in the 80s. Like I would always, yeah, I would just draw Transformers. I would make up stories. And my dad was a gearhead. He was a stonemason, man's man, salt of the earth, great dude. He didn't quite get his kid, but he was supportive of his
Preach,
kid.
James. I've never heard this story before. Have
Yeah, yeah,
you?
that sounds vaguely familiar.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like a lot of people from our generation, like my dad didn't quite get me, but he was young enough to be like, the stuff he's watching and doing is kind of cool. He would watch it with me because he was essentially kind of a kid still too.
Yeah.
So I was fortunate in that respect. So he allowed me to be as weird as I wanted to be and just kind of explore the things I wanted to explore. And I drew and drew up until I was about 12 or 13. Then I tried to play sports. I tried to be athletic. I tried to be a cool kid and all that kind of stuff. And it quickly didn't work. So I went probably my sophomore year of high school. I started really getting back into my artistic side
Mm-hmm.
and it flourished from there. And I stuck with it and stuck with it. And I was always like a big reader. Like
Yeah.
I loved the Lord of the Rings before the movies ever came. Like when I was in middle school, I was reading Tolkien and The Hobbit and
Mm-hmm.
all everything I get my hands on. And that really just I felt like at that point, like I was less of an artist and
Yeah.
more of like a creator. And like I had all these ideas for stories and stuff. And I felt like I was somebody who could make stories, but I could just also happen to be able to draw the stuff too. And so it was up and down for a number of years. And then in my late 20s, I really buckled down and said, I'm going to take this novel I was trying to write when I was in college. I'm going to try to make it like a comic book kind of thing, but it never worked as a comic. And then somebody handed me a copy of Berserk in 2004 or
Mm-hmm.
2003. I was at Walmart. Somebody handed me a copy of Berserk. It's like, you need to read this, check it out. It reminded me of you, like it's the stuff you've told me.
Mm-hmm.
And I read it and I was like, it could be this, like it could be like manga.
Mm-hmm.
I'd never explored that before, even though in the 90s I was watching anime before anybody knew what it was. Like you get stuffed in a locker for watching it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not like it is today.
Yeah, I mean, I had bootleg VHS tapes of like Vampire Hunter D, Ghost in the Shell, Akira, Ninja Scroll, stuff like that. And so that was always kind of where my heart was. And then once I kind of found that path and that direction, I started being like, okay, let's walk this path for a while. And that's kind of what it's been ever since.
So, what was the first comic that you attempted to write and draw?
Aurora.
Is it really?
It was in 2000 I started writing Aurora as like my Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
So I had all this history and all this depth of the world and everything. And then I had a couple little horror things I tried to do here and there, just because I'm a horror fan too. And it kept going back to Aurora. And then finally, a few years later, a friend of mine read a treatment that I wrote for the world, and he was like, "You should make this a comic." I was like, "It'll never work as a comic." And then I started studying because I always loved comics. I started studying some of my favorites, Jim Lee being chief among them as far as American artists go.
Yeah.
And him and Chris Claremont, a lot of the 90s stuff, X-Men, I loved X-Men, Spawn, stuff like that, of course, 90s kid. So I tried to make it that. And then I knew that what I wanted to do had a beginning and it had an end, and that was it, and it got bigger over the years, but that was my first attempt. Many, many, many drafts. Even my first issue of Aurora that I stapled and put on tables at shows in 2012 wound up not being the first chapter that's in the first volume now. Like I pulled it, it wasn't good enough. And see, that's what I do. That's kind of my problem. I'll finish something like it's finished. And I'm like, no, it's not. And I'll tear it up. Just kind of do it again. But yeah, so I ramble. So if that answers your question at
No,
all.
you're not rambling
No,
at all. Yeah,
I was
absolutely.
gonna say I really appreciate that statement though, because I think that's one of the things. So I guess that's the question that I have, knowing that you have this uh, perfectionist streak that you go back and like you said, you tore up the originals because you saw it as expanded. When do you hit that point where no, this has to be it because I've got to move to the next one? How does that
Well,
process look?
it I had to bring in two editors to say it's done. Like I'll pass it to each of them and they're like, no, it's done. Okay, no, fix this. Now it's done. And because I did a Kickstarter for Aurora Volume 3 and it was finished. Like I just had to do some lettering and stuff like that. I promised delivery in April. Well, I just got the proof in because like back in August, I was like, guys, I got to get this thing done. I got to get it out. These people got to get their stuff. So I brought in two people I really trust. Like I gave them the book. I was like, let me know is if it's done, it's done. We're going. And then the second editor found something to fix. So anyway, I have to bounce it off of other people because if I leave it to me, it'll never get done because I'll keep finding things because the way my brain works and a lot of other people I talk to when I do panels and stuff like that,
Yeah.
they're like, "Oh, I thought that was just me. I thought there's something wrong with me." Like my brain doesn't work like a linear path. It's like a spider web or like a drop of oil in water. One idea spreads out all these different ways. You know what I mean? And
Hmm.
so like I'll have an idea and I'm like, "Oh, it could be this." And it affects them, it affects that place, it affects that history, it affects that timeline. And then for every idea I have, that's how it works. And so many other people are out there like that. That's why they can't get started. I'm like, you just have to find a starting point, find a point to start, and let that stuff kind of take care of itself. And find people you trust to kind of keep you on your path.
No,
Because
oh, go ahead.
no, 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 I was gonna say
No,
because
I
that's kind of
was
what you have to do when you have a brain like that. But go ahead.
No, I was about to say, and I'm glad to hear that because I'm one of those people that never get started, and I have there's been a couple people that say, "Send me what you've worked on," and I'll send them back. This is great, you should do, and I don't do it because I'm like, no, because when I read it, I find no, that's not going to work. That's not going to work, and so I appreciate that. And you saying that made me think of something I was told years ago by one of my professors, and it was great works of art are never completed. They have to be abandoned. Like you can
Yeah.
sit there and finesse everything as you go along. And so Joe was talking about the art, and obviously you're writing this as well. You mentioned Lord of the Rings. As you approach it, how do you approach the writing of it, knowing that it's going to also have this visual component?
Well, that was the tricky part when I started because like I had so many influences visually, like Eastern, Western artists and all that kind of stuff, different styles like painting and inking and all this. I was like, so what's it gonna look like? What's it gonna be? So basically, I have to just kind of sit with myself in my studio here and off and listen to music, and I just kind of see it. You kind of let the movie play in your head, and you just kind of I put that on paper. I joke with people a lot of times. I'm like, you created this? I'm like, no, I'm the conduit. Like wherever this stuff comes from, I'm just like putting it on paper for it. You know?
Yeah, the ancient Greek idea of the muse, right? The muse passes
Exactly.
through me.
Hmm.
That's how you know when you're in the zone. That's to me. I don't know a better way to put it. But when you know when it's coming, you're just like, I don't know. I had no control over that. It's something I actually, and this is going to, okay, I'm not trying to drop names, but Jim Shooter, who run Marvel, and I've just probably of all the people I've done panels with, he's probably the most just because he does a lot of the Inner Geek Lexicon, all those those
Hmm.
shows. And he told me I was insane because we were, well, let's just say maybe one of us was drinking wine and the other one was drinking bourbon, and I shouldn't have been matching him.
Right.
And it was in Huntington. And I said, do you ever feel like you lose control? Because I feel like that's when you know you're in the sweet spot. He looked at me like I was from Mars. Like, no, I know exactly what I'm doing. I was like, really? I've
Yeah.
never, because no, no, it's just, so I like hearing that because to me, that's the best part. And it's been a while since I've had that is when you're like, oh no, I don't know where it came from, but that's how it had to be.
Sometimes, I grew up on a lot of like farms in Mercer County and stuff, and I use this analogy a lot, and some people get it. Like when you're on the farm and you're having fun with your friends, and everybody's hanging off the side of the bed of the truck, and it gets to that speed, right, where you feel like you can run with it, but you better
Yep.
let go now because you're going to break a leg in another 10 seconds if you try to let go. That's how it feels a lot of times. Like
I
you
get
get the
that.
truck started, you get it rolling down the hill, and then you're just trying to hang on to it and find out where it's going.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
that's how my ideas work a lot of times. It's awesome and it's crazy and it's also very stressful at the same time.
Well, and let me get my nickel for saying making a Harlan Ellison reference, but as I always do every episode. But there's a Harlan Ellison. I think it's in the documentary about him called Dreams with Sharp Teeth. Somebody asked him about his writing process, and he gives his normal sarcastic response that he gets all his ideas from a company in Schenectady, New York. But then he says, really, there's those happy accidents sometimes that you'll realize, oh, I put a seed back here that I didn't even realize I was putting. And then all of a sudden it blooms in front of you as you write, and you just have that moment of, oh, okay, that'll work.
Yeah, like I was one of my one of my good buddies, Chris McDaniel. He's also one of my editors. He's always at the shows with me. You probably know who that is.
Oh, his
Um,
pulled pork was excellent 2 weekends
oh yeah, you
ago.
had some of that, right? I
Oh
told
my
him for I told
God.
him for years he needs to have a food truck. For years.
I did he not tell you? I followed up with him on Messenger and he was like, and bless him, he was like, we talked about this. And truthfully, I'm terrible about remembering. I was like, yeah, sure, I guess we did because we talked about barbecue before. And this is off point. Sorry.
No, go
Let
right
me tell
ahead
you,
because it's
no, his pulled
delicious.
pork was really good. And I
Yeah.
have well, Ray, I have a smoker.
Hmm.
James has ate a lot of my meat. Anyway, we do a
Ba-dums.
pretty decent job. But I thought his pulled pork, I had questions. Like I had after smoking questions. He was like,
Mhm.
well, I just did this. Well, I just did this. Well, I just did this. So ask him about it later.
Well, I told him, and
And
he
his
was
sauce was
like,
good too.
"Yeah, yeah." He told me I love chili. I'm a sucker for chili, and like he was like, "Well, this is what I do. I made chili once, and I sweat the onions." I was like, "Wait, what?" And he was like, "Oh, it's nothing." I was like, "No, it's not."
It
I was
takes
like, "You're
time.
painting, dude."
Yeah. It was some of the best pulled pork I had in a long time. And that's coming
Yeah.
from me actually.
Oh yeah. He's good.
It was good. He should do some competitions with that.
Yeah. Oh, he knows. He knows. He double knows now.
Okay.
But what was I saying?
You
I
were
brought him
talking
up and
we
then
talk about his meat. I got to stop making
yeah,
jokes.
talking about Chris's meat.
Yeah, which is
Yeah. And
delicious.
then my mind just wandered.
Back to Chris's meat.
But um I was oh yeah, after Richmond, me and him went to a little Mexican restaurant next door and we had dinner. And I was telling him about a couple of ideas I had had the previous year and I've been trying to hammer them out. You were talking about dropping seeds earlier.
Yeah.
Like there was always this weird dark guy with this brimmed hat in my story. I saw him in my head as like a boogeyman. And I was like, what is he? Well, so I would always leave it there. So my main character has a history with this guy, and then it became this, it became that, and then it became like that guy's less of a villain and more like a dark guardian angel for the guy, and all this other kind of crazy stuff. And I was telling Chris about it, and then I wrote this little ideas backstory, And the backstory is a father-son backstory.
Hmm.
And it's a story of loss. And I don't want to give too much away, but it's like I got choked up and I almost started crying at the table talking about it because I realized, as I was telling Chris about it, I was writing what I watched my dad go through when I was a kid and him trying to figure out, we were poor and him trying to figure out how to be a good dad and a single dad at that, and I was mirroring his experience in this guy's story. So this little seed did that, and I got choked up. I realized what was happening. So when you're telling a story, your brain will draw it from all these different places based on little tiny ideas you had here and there. Your brain will find a way to make it relative to your experiences.
Yeah. Yeah, that and it's true. And that's where the best stuff comes from because it's all three-dimensional and people can relate to it because everybody has that story. If they don't have that story, they know somebody has that story or they've witnessed somebody that has that story because it's just a human experience.
Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely. So, when you were talking about some of your, let's talk, you talked a little bit about your anime and some of the inspiration you got from there, but you also talked about horror. Or what are some of your favorite kind of horror things that have just inspired you over the years?
My favorite movie of all time is the original Vampire Hunter D from 1985. I just love how it's like, and it reminds me a lot of like classic European horror films because it's like,
It is.
um, it there's this feeling of seclusion, and I think whenever you're telling a good story of horror, like you have to feel like you're isolated, you have to feel like you're alone, and like that movie always did that for me, and all my favorite horror movies do that, like
Hmm.
The Exorcist and the good Nightmare on Elm Street movies. I'll put it that way. And I even love slasher horrors and stuff. American Werewolf in London, that's a great example.
Oh yeah.
And Bram Stoker's Dracula. I mean, it's like all these great horror movies, you have this feeling of seclusion, like you're alone. Like if this one thing you're clinging to hope for can't help you, then it's it. It's over. And the thing I loved about that Vampire Hunter D movie from '85 was the it's like it's Clint Eastwood fistful of dollars, man with no name. You
Yeah.
know, it's not about Clint Eastwood, it's not about D, it's about everybody around him in that story. They are the main characters of the story. He's the force of nature that comes through. And if this guy, like the Clint Eastwood movies, even or Seven Samurai, if these people can't help, then that's it. That's the scary part, and that there's a sense of realism to that. Like there are certain situations in life to where you feel all alone. If this one thing can't help you, that's a wrap.
Yeah.
Whether it's like paying a mortgage or being in a life or death situation or whatever. Horror, like being a family man now, there are different levels to horror.
Yeah.
Like paying your bills and stress and stuff like that. It all goes back to horror, which always pisses me off that horror is not recognized at like the Academy Awards and stuff like that. Because horror is so intrinsic in our society. It's such an integral part of our society and our entertainment. I can't believe that there aren't accolades for that.
And there's also the most consistent genre throughout film. It's
Hmm.
and I don't mean that in the sense of yes, it's been there, but it's also usually the most profitable.
Well, yeah,
Still,
and it's
still.
also everybody wants to do the horror movie they've always wanted to see. Like all these actors, you'll see them every now and then, like a low budget horror movie. And it's like, I always just wanted to do a movie like this. I've always been a fan of this genre, and
Hmm.
even directors will jump in and do horror. Horror is kind of on the upswing right now. I think A24
Yeah,
is going to be
absolutely.
making some really good horror, and they're like an art house place. So if they're in on it, then I feel like they see the respect that it deserves, and that makes me feel good.
Yeah,
But
no,
I'm a big fan of classic vampire movies and stuff like that, like the Hammer films
mhm.
with Christopher Lee. And there was even some 80s, some goofy 80s, 90s stuff like there was one called Metal Beast, I think, and Cellar Dweller and all this
Stellar
other
Dweller. We've talked about it on here before several times,
Cellar
actually.
Dweller. That was shocked me when I was 11 years old. I was like, whoa, he just totally ate that chick's eyeball and she's dead. She's done.
Chad could wax on about Cellar Dweller if he was on here right now.
Oh yeah.
So, and before James probably has questions about your influences on artists and whatnot, how long did it take you to do that first Or well, no, you talked about handing it out, but that first actual comic of Aurora, how long did that take?
I would say just putting pen to paper. It,
Yeah.
it took about, because the first comic after the handout stapled version, I held it until I had 3 chapters that I could release in like a graphic novel format, like 96 pages. It took about 2 years because I went back and forth and back and forth. I show my roommate, I'd show some of my Lexington artist friends, I'd get opinions and stuff like that, and really try to hammer it down. And that was where I started developing this whole you just got to put it out kind of
Hmm.
mentality, put it out and let the people decide. And, probably about from 2012 to 2014, I would say is like really while I was hitting it hard, trying to get that done and put that out.
Yeah.
It didn't take that long to draw it. It took that long to draw it 3 times.
Pay the artist, man. Pay the artist.
Oh
And damn
no.
sure pay the local artist.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So, uh, well, hold on, James. Did you have a question?
You mentioned local, and I wanted to bring this up because uh, we're talking about Aurora, and so you did the manga, and then you've got the anime. Um, but and correct me if I'm wrong, you also wrote Derelict, which is a horror novel set in Harrodsburg, Kentucky.
Exactly. Yeah, I did. And
And
we have volume 2 of that going to be coming later next year too.
oh really? I think it's really interesting because I think I have some friends that are really into horror and they talk about folk horror and things like that. And you talking about that feeling of being alone. And I think often the more rural areas there is a sense of nobody's coming, right? We're
Oh
not
yeah.
when there's tragedies that strike, we're not New York City. Nobody's going to swoop in, and we're a flyover state. We're a flyover. There's all of this. So I just wanted to, as you thought about where you were going to set the story, how important was Harrodsburg as part of that setting and that thinking?
Yeah.
Well, it was super important because without getting into too much detail, there were places like in Mercer County that if your place wasn't haunted, you were the weird one. It was like living in England. You know what I mean? So
Yes,
like
because it's
especially the
small
post
town.
especially the closer you get the kind of parable, and all that. But like yeah, it was important because I knew the area. I knew the ghost stories and the legends of the area and stuff like that. And I was always a fan of it. And because whenever you get together and have a few beers with buddies from back home, you'll kind of bring up stories like, "Hey, you remember the thing about Cane Run? Ah, you remember that thing about Percival Road and the faceless guy at the mailbox and the horses going up and down Buster Pike." So I had all these great stories, and I was like, I want to throw this stuff in a blender. I want to put it in Harrodsburg. I want to shine a light on that. Use real places, real street names, real areas, and even the climactic finish of the book, it's kind of derelict is kind of like a metaphor for small town America. It's
Hmm.
like nobody cares. Like nobody, that's why what happens in the book is able to happen because no one cares. No one cared. And so derelict is kind of like, yeah, there's a figurative, a literal meaning to it in the book, but there's also like a more amorphous meaning to it as far as like, this place is a derelict, not because it's not worth caring about, but just because it's in the grand scheme of things, it just gets looked over. Like you said, it's a flyover. And I think that is more scary than anything because I've flown to and from places and you look out the window of an airplane and you see like little towns, there are a few houses here and there, and you see like a general store and then you're gone.
Hmm.
And I'm like, my head goes, some messed up shit has happened there, I guarantee it. You know what I mean?
Everywhere.
Yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
so that was kind of like my inspiration for finally putting that book to paper is I wanted to represent all these different genres of horror in one story: your sci-fi horror, your folk horror, your slasher, kind of your monster, your paranormal ghost stories and stuff, like all this kind of stuff. And I wanted it to feel like big, but I also wanted it to feel very secluded. And that was kind of where the idea came for the book. And my wife is like really ready for me to get to the next book because she wants to know what happens to one of the guys. And I was like, I'm not gonna tell you. She's like, but you gotta write the book. And I was like, well, you'll find out.
Well, But I think you bring up a really interesting point there because I do think there's so much, a something about small towns and at least small town Kentucky. Um, those stories get passed on and they get added to as time goes on.
Mhm.
But I think the other thing that becomes really interesting and in some ways challenging is that until somebody does what you did and write a book, those stories can be trapped there, right? If nobody's telling the stories outside of that context. And so, I think about all the stories I heard growing up about, oh, there used to be evil, you know, demon worshippers here,
Or
here,
just
here.
jacktails,
Yeah,
from Appalachia, things like that.
yeah,
Oh
and they
yeah.
don't. If somebody, so I think about it's a conversation I've had with other people is how many stories that are good stories that would be at least entertaining, if not have parables and histories and tied into them, do we lose because an area dies out and that story doesn't get told outside of that area? And so, it goes back to, we could even take it back to the Grimm's fairy tales. How important was it that those two brothers went out and collected those stories? And what does that look like? So as I was reading the summary, and I'm going to order your book now, by the way.
Thank
I
you.
think that becomes one of the key things too. As I was reading it, I was like, oh, how important is this? I'm My focus for work is to study the history of education. How important is this as even a historical consideration of where these stories came from and who was part of them, and how they then become this part of a literary telling.
Well, it's that was an important thing for me is like there's a story of the place called Hank's Bridge in the book, and we we make Hank a ghost, a character in the book, and all these other like legends and stuff, we make them characters in the book. I actually worked with the Mercer County Historical Society on researching some of the stuff. And one of the things was about the construction of Fort Herod, the real reason for the construction of Fort Herod, and James Herod's legend, and Daniel Boone, if he had any
Hmm.
real impact on Harrodsburg, which he didn't. He went around kind of Harrodsburg in 1776, but he knew James Herod. They were close, or not close, but they were friendly. And so I worked with the Harrisburg Historical Society on some of these stories, some of these ghost stories, and some of them are just fairy tales and myths, and some of them are rooted in real things that kind of happened. Don't go over there because that guy died over there on a tractor. Well, he did, and that's factual and that kind of stuff. But when I got to James Herod, in the third book I'm planning, it's going to be a collection of diary entries between Daniel Boone and James Herod about the history of Harrodsburg and why this thing is sleeping underground there and everything. And I told them how I wanted to write James Herod out, and they were like, "Funny you mentioned that. That's what happened to him." And I was like, "No way!" I think what I actually said to the old dude who was helping me, I said, "No fucking way," because I was so shocked.
Yeah.
He goes, "Yeah." He's like, "That's what," and he was excited seeing me get excited because I was going to put this in a book and sharing the history of my hometown to a world who may not know it or anything like that.
It's like your
So
own
yeah,
little dairy, right?
what's that?
It's like your dairy, like for Stephen King's Dairy, or
Oh
Maine,
yeah,
different things like that, or oh, geez, Southern writer James. Everything took place in the same county.
As I lay dying,
Shit.
why am I blanking
Ah,
on
damn it. Oh my
Faulkner? Why am I
God.
blanking on Faulkner?
Faulkner. All of them took place in the same county, right?
Yeah,
hmm
yeah, because Rose for Emily is all about, the lady killing the guy that she was going to marry and then sleeping next to his corpse for 40 years. That's a fun story.
Anyway,
yeah, yeah.
so
Like
go ahead. Sorry.
no, I was going to say yeah, like all that stuff is like it people that read it and really dug it, and we did like a whole release on Main Street in Harrodsburg for it, and people they were lined up around the block. I couldn't believe it. My wife came in, she was like, "They're lined up around the block," and I was like, "What?" And I was like, I thought my friends and family would show up, maybe a couple of people that were curious, but it was a big deal, and it made me feel good. And everybody was like, "We really appreciate you making this about Harrodsburg and about all of our crazy, goofy stuff that's happened here." I was like, "I don't know any other way to write it."
That's
Well,
cool.
I think though, I'm fascinated. Like I said, I'm gonna, once we're done, I'm gonna order the book because and I'm probably not supposed to actually talk about this, but I'm going to anyway. Um, there's a edited book that will be coming out, and it's looking actually at um, campus ghost stories. And I'm writing a little bit about the University of Kentucky and a couple of other places. And of course, it's going to be academic, so we're going to tell the story, and then we're going to analyze how it gets context into the time that it came from.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Um, but I think that's so important, again, for preserving the stories, but also what that means to the community then, right? Because it preserves the community as well, at least as a snapshot in time. And
Yeah,
and it makes that not a flyover area anymore, right? Once you
Mhm.
know the story of an area, it's really hard to go, we don't need to stop here.
right.
Right.
There were a couple of people that took issue with how I kind of wrote the story. Like they were well, one person put on Amazon, they were like, don't like how you portrayed the people in the town. I'm like, I'm from there. I was like, you talking about how the way they talk? That's the flavor, you know. I
That
I,
is
I
the
put the
flavor.
flavor in there.
Hmm.
But there were some down and out kind of drifter type characters, but the story is told through the lens of the main character, and he is a drifter himself, and he is a down and out guy himself. So he's projecting himself on other people as he's going through this horrible situation, you know. So book two is a bit of a change in light of that because a lot of people in the town, it wasn't just the down and out, downtrodden people the story is about. It's about the people in town who come together and help the town recover from this whole thing in book two. So book number one is like this huge 130 piece orchestra of horror, you know.
Hmm.
Book number two is a piano recital.
Yeah, I think I get it. Yeah.
It's more
Well,
quiet, it's more intimate, and it's like it's more character focused on this one terrible thing that's happening, this one key element. And so I had conversations with people in the town about it. They were like, "Oh yeah, okay, I see that now. That's cool." You know, as a writer, you don't want to have to explain it to people, but I think they were taking things the wrong way. But almost everybody that read it loved it, got it. I'm excited. I was actually looking for notes for book two and book three just last week. I was taking a break from some Aurora stuff. And I was looking at those. I was like, okay, okay, yeah, because I had other ideas. But I'm excited to get back to that for sure.
that leads me actually to my next question is how do you keep them separate?
It's hard because Aurora has horror elements. Like there's horror in Aurora. Like I talk with people all the time. Like I think a lot of the great fantasy tales have elements of horror in them. You know,
Mhm.
certainly the Lord of the Rings has horror. Ring of
Of course.
Time has horror. All the Final Fantasy games have some sort of horror element to them. You know, like especially like Final Fantasy VII. I had a whole YouTube channel, still do, of me just playing that and talking about theories and stuff from that. But there's sci-fi horror, there's
Mhm.
paranormal horror, there's all kinds of stuff in that game, you know. And other great tales over the years. You know, you think about recently Game of Thrones horror. The Northern Wall, you know, it's like basically
Yeah,
zombies. You
yeah,
know,
absolutely.
I
The
think
White Walkers
horror.
are zombies.
Yeah, I think horror tiptoes into every genre somewhat because there has to be some kind of feeling of fleeting of fear in every great epic story you're telling. So I keep Aurora and Derelict separate because I have four other stories I'll eventually get to, and I have to keep everything separate, you know. But sometimes horror bleeds into Aurora, and that's given birth to some of the best ideas in the world.
Mhm.
Like watching horror, and I'll tell you the movie I was watching. I was watching, and it's not a great movie. It's an okay movie. White Noise, the Michael Keaton,
Yeah,
the one with
I
Michael
read.
Keaton. There was a White Noise too, but how
My
they
wife loves the first white noise, by the way, so I'll have to be like, oh, somebody mentioned it on the podcast. She'll be ecstatic.
how they deal with the afterlife and the questions we have about the other side or whatever
Mhm.
really helped me formulate my idea with how I wanted to attack the predatory forces in Aurora. Like what's happening to the world? Why did the Darklands happen? Why did Aurora disappear? Who's responsible for it? It's nothing earthbound. It's nothing here. It's something that we don't understand and we don't. And that's the point of the story is they're slowly putting together this thing, but when they get closer to the truth and the answers, they have to confront this terrible horror. And so horror absolutely plays an element in every story that I tell. I can't say every fantasy story, but every fantasy story I tell, horror plays a big element in it.
Well, I think you said something though that is really relevant. Horror does bleed into everything, and as you said that, I actually thought, oh, it really. I mean, that's almost at the center of every romance movie as well, right? It's the
Oh
horror
yeah.
of what am I going to do if I lose this person? Like
Hmm.
I immediately went, The Notebook is a horror story in its own way, right? It's you get both sides of that story of having to let go of someone at the end, but also having that moment of what if I would have lost them at the beginning?
Dread and horror are different for everyone. I mean, and I know a lot of like older guys now in their 70s and 80s. And when I was growing up, they were good old boys. If zombies were real, they would have went out in the field and killed them. They wouldn't have thought about it. If werewolves were real, they would have went out in the field and killed them. Wouldn't have worried about it. But having to tell your feelings to your child, having to tell your son or your daughter you love them or whatever, they would rather go in the field and fight a herd of zombies. You know
Yep.
what I mean? So
Yeah.
that's not scary to them. That is scary to them. So horror is different for everyone.
Yeah.
So depending on, as Obi-Wan Kenobi said, your certain point of view,
Mhm.
whatever is scary to you, like I went and saw Blair Witch Project when it was in the theater. I was like, this sucks. It's like I just got motion sickness. That's it. I'm scared of motion sickness. That was the horror for me. But you can go watch, name it, anything else with horror elements to it. Critters. When I was a
Mhm.
kid, I hated critters. I still don't like critters because I don't like the thought of something gnawing on me. You know what I mean?
Oh, so you don't
Like
like it because it actually bothers you?
it bothered me. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
don't like the thought of something gnawing on me. You
Yeah.
know what
Yeah.
I mean? And like, but Blair Witch Project, I'll go out in the woods. I don't care. I'll knock down some stick figures out of a tree. I don't give a shit. You know what I mean? That's not scary to me.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, yeah, we have we know of someone that, if I remember correctly, Joe, laughed their way through Hostel.
Yeah, we do know
Thought it
someone
was
who
just
laughed their way through Hostel,
hilarious
laughed in
from
the middle of
beginning
the
to end.
theater. Yeah, through Hostel. Even
I'll tell
though,
you a horror movie I laughed all the way through was A Quiet Place. I was like, this movie is dumb as hell, man. And people roasted me over it. It's like, oh man, I'm unfollowing you. I was like, I don't care, man. I can't hide this one. I just do not like it. And I was watching it with my wife, and we were just laughing. I was like, how's anybody still alive? You can't not make a noise. And Saturday Night Live had the what was it, burrito night
Yeah,
hmm
skit, and it took place in a quiet place. And everybody had gas and everything. It's like, no, that would never fly, man. You couldn't hide from those things.
yeah,
well, that's the joke that I always make is no parent nobody could have a child.
No.
Nobody, I can't get my kids to stop talking for 2 seconds. And it would
Right.
not be like, I don't know what there we would have to fundamentally change our evolution, because my kids, like if I say don't say anything, they immediately scream back. Like even if I'm right next to them, they get loud to say, why shouldn't I say anything? I'm like, I'm right here, just shut up for a minute.
I was the joke I made was like, none of these people have been swiped in their sleep. You're sleeping outside in the woods. No one has sinus problems. Nobody's snoring. Nobody's getting poached while they're sleeping. No, I don't buy it. I don't
That's
buy it. I'd be
actually,
the first one gone.
yeah, I was gonna say
Well,
that's what my wife said. She was like, "You're dead. You're dead. I'm gonna wake up. Something's gonna be eating you. You're dead." And I'm like, only if you don't fall asleep first, because if so, I'm good. I got a
I'd go to
minute to
sleep
get
with a
out.
sign on my head. Just kill me quick when I start snoring. Just make it quick. Go for the head. Go for the throat.
So I don't mean to change the subject, but back to what we're actually here for. Aurora, you're actually, well, not one of the things we're here for, but to just go ahead and give a quick plug, the animated Aurora. So that not only do you have the balls to do a multi-comic series, then you're deciding I'm going to make my own anime.
Well, yeah, and it's crazy how that happens. So,
And we'll get
I think it,
to, I was listening to this, man, that's some good narration. Not only is it good narration, it's good writing. Like
well,
the voice and the writing's pretty good.
well, man, I appreciate it. Like, one of the things that I focused on was just becoming a better writer. And not only that, but knowing how to convey to the voice actors like how they're feeling, not only how they're feeling, but how the person they're speaking as, how this world has changed how they feel and where they're
Mhm.
going. So when we started this whole journey of animating Aurora, to preface this, I'm the guy who doesn't think he knows, but he knows how long something's going to take. And he'll put a release date on it because he knows how long it's going to take. This whole process has taught me I don't know jack about how long something takes. I've had to pull it, say, hey, this is gonna be delayed. I've had to pull things. So my wife told me, she's like, everything you're doing is amazing, but the rule is you don't put a release date out until it's finished and ready to go. I was like, that's what we're doing from now on.
Yeah.
But in I think it was 2017, Steve Bloom was at Lexington Comic and Toy Con in 2017. I think it was 17. And I went by and I had the collected volume of Aurora, the first one with 8 chapters in it or 8 issues in it. And I met him, I talked to him. I was like, you influenced someone in this book, and someday we're going to work on the animated series together. And he was like, well, I can't wait to work with you, Ray. It's going to be great. And he was just like, very cool. He's got that cool, smoky
Probably said it to
baritone.
500 or 2,000 different fans who said, well, someday we're going to do this together. And I can't wait to work with you. It would be great.
Well, that's what he told me. Like, I saw him again at, it wasn't called Galaxy Con. It was the last one in Louisville.
Yeah, I know, whatever the name of it is.
Whatever
Yeah.
it was called. Yeah. 2019. And
Mhm.
I met him again. I went over and I remember because I talked to my assistant at the booth, Aaron Paul, who's a great dude. He was the first big Aurora fan. He was the first one to come find me in Lexington. He's
Mhm.
like, I want all the books. I want a t-shirt. He's like, this is fantastic. He was the one that really gave me the confidence about the story to begin with back in like 2015 or something. Um, so I made him made it to where he helps me at the booth. Who better to sell it than someone who became a fan?
Absolutely.
And so I told him, I'm going to go talk to Steve Bloom. And if he agrees to do the series, we're going to do the animated series. And he goes, wait, we're going to do the what? I was like, well, figure it out, man. I'll be right back. So I go and I'm talking to Steve. I wait for him to get back. I talk to his handler. I was like, oh, no, he's gone. I missed him. And so the whole series almost didn't happen. And then I talked to his handler. She said, no, he's coming back for one more signing. He's flying back to LA. And I was like, okay. So I waited patiently and he sat down. I just jumped right in the front of his line. He's like, hey, what can I do for you? And I had this print of Spike Spiegel that I made. I was having him sign it for me and I was going to pay him and everything. I was like, he's like, this is awesome. I've signed a bunch of these this weekend. I was like, yeah, I'm selling them at my booth. And he was like, you did this? I was like, yeah. Of course, he was being very nice, very cordial.
Mhm.
He's such a great guy. And I told him, I was like, I met you in 2017 at Lexington Comic and Toy Con, and I want to let you know I'm getting serious about writing this show and I want you to be in it. And he goes, really? And he was like, and people were building up behind me. I was like, but I'll talk to you. Maybe I can talk to you another time, email you. No, no, no. Get back here behind the booth with me. So he had me come behind his signing table as he's signing for other people. And I'm telling him the character I'm pitching him, the guy you heard in the
Mhm.
pilot. I told him he's like a Lancelot, Fallen Knight, love triangle. He was the third wheel in the love triangle, all this other kind of stuff. And now he's aged, he's got regret. He feels responsible for a lot of what's happened to the world because he wasn't who he was supposed to be. And he stopped signing for people. He held his hand up. He's like, give me just a second, guys. He looks at me, he goes like this. He goes, man, he goes, this is right in my wheelhouse. He's like, I'd love to do it. He was like, and he gave me his business card. He put his cell phone number, he put his agent's cell phone number. He's like, call her tomorrow. If I'm gonna do it, it's gotta be union. We started a whole other thing that took about a year, but I got it into a union project. I was signatory for the project, so we would get anybody we wanted at that point. And
Mhm.
then we recorded him. I was doing some rough animation. We recorded him August of 2020. It took a long time to get it rolling because I had to get it union certified and all that kind
Yeah,
of
yeah.
stuff. Work with his agent. And then after we did his recording in 2020, we shot the bull for a little while. He was super cool, and he finally said, "Man, this is amazing." And I'm not fluffing myself. I'm not. I'm
No,
very humble about this stuff.
I get it.
But he
You should
he
fluff.
said,
We'll fluff you. You want us to
well,
be your fluffers?
yeah, my fluffers.
I'll
Orgasmo, was it
fluff you. I'll
Orgasmo, I think?
fluff you so hard. Keep going.
We'll get to fluffing. So we are talking, and he was like, dude, the writing. He's like, the writing here is really good. It's heartfelt. He's like, I don't feel like I'm playing a character. I feel like I'm acting on screen, and because I told all the voice actors, I was like, I don't need you in pocket. I need you to do you, and you're playing this character. You are this character. I wrote it because in 2004, I would lay in my bed in my efficiency apartment on Lansdowne Drive, Cross Creek Apartments, if you know where that's at,
I know where
right down the street
Lansdowne
from
is. Yep.
Hacienda. I
Yep.
had the apartment over the pool, and I would sit there on Saturday nights because I worked Applebee's bartending during the day and I worked third shift at Walmart at night, and I would write, lay in bed and write with G4 going.
Mhm.
And then anime would come on G4. I would sit there and listen. I was listening to Trigun. I was listening to Cowboy Bebop. I was listening to all this stuff. I'm writing these characters as I'm listening to these actors portray them. And
Mhm.
I told this story to Steve, And he was like, wow. He goes, what's your wish list? I was like, what do you mean? He was like, who do you want? He was like, I know everybody. I'm friends with everybody. Give me your list. And he started telling me who he thought would be good as different characters. And he goes, Renzia, I think Johnny Young Bosch would be good as him. I was like, dude, I was like, that's, I wrote him to be like a more like snarky, smart ass Bash the Stampede because I would listen to Trigun and I would watch it and I was writing Renzia, you know? And so that night, Michelle Ruff,
Mhm.
Yuri Lowenthal, Johnny Bosch, they all messaged me and we were off and running. I sent them treatments for the script and they've all pitched in. Like they've all been like, you might want to try this. Usually, when we're reading scripts and stuff, and do this, do that, format it this way. I took every bit of knowledge they gave me and just put it into everything. And then, like, I'll still send some of them like treatments for scripts for episode 2, episode 3, other things I'm getting ready to start doing.
Mhm.
And they're like, "Looks great. This sounds good." So it's a team effort with these people as well. So they became a part of the team. And so it all snowballed. And then we had other people come on board. I've had some background artists come on board. I'm basically doing all the animation myself almost. But the backgrounds, I was like, I suck at backgrounds. I can't do them. I got to hire people to do that. So, but that's how it started. And Steve told me when we had that conversation, he said, before asked me for the wish list, he said, everybody I've talked to at a show says they're going to do this. He said, you're the only person that's done it. And I was like, look, I have to do it. I didn't even take it as a compliment. I don't even brag about it. I'm like, I have to do it. Because if I don't, like, I'm going to leave that on the table when I die. I'm going to be like, I didn't do that. And I'm not the type of person that's cool with that. I'm I'm a little bit different than a lot of other people out there in the fact that I will sacrifice 2 nights of sleep to get a thing done. Because I have a real blue collar work ethic from my dad and my whole family, really.
Mhm.
So I take that, I translate it into art and creativity. And I'm like, only I can tell this story, whether it's good or whether it's bad is irrelevant. There's 9 billion people on this planet, 8 billion, whatever. There's an audience out there for what I'm doing. And with the internet now, you just have to know how to find them. So I'm just putting it out there and letting them find it.
Yeah.
And then we're just going to figure it out.
So what's the timeline? What's the drop?
Well, I am fixing a couple of things. I just posted a thing on YouTube. I'm fixing some timing or some pacing and
Mhm.
a few animation issues right now because me and a couple of editors looked at the final episode, the final cut, and there's a spot in the middle where it drags a little bit and it's a little bit weird. And so we were like, we can fix that, but it's going to take 2 weeks to fix it. So I'm thinking by the beginning of next week, I'm just going to shadow drop it whenever it's ready. I'm not going to put another release date out there. I'm not going to do anything like that, but it's probably going to be in the next week or two. And I'm
Mhm.
just going to shadow drop it. I'm like, it's out. Go watch it.
That sounds great. Just let us
Yeah.
know so we can share it on the Bonehead page. We'd
Oh,
like
for
to do
real.
that.
I
We'd
absolutely
like
will. I'll be blasted. I'll be carpet
we,
bombing it all over the internet.
we'd like to do that. I mean, you'll be more popular than us, but that's okay. We'll let our 6 viewers know.
I won't be popular. Aurora will be popular. I've been telling a lot of people, I'm like, I don't care if no one knows who I am. I just want them to enjoy the show, enjoy the story. That's
Yeah.
that's my big goal right now.
Well, and even before it drops, they can order the manga right now off of Amazon,
They can,
correct?
yeah. You can get on Amazon, you can go to auroraofficial.com, and if you want a signed copy, you can get it right there. Because obviously it's coming from Amazon, I can't sign it. But if you want signed and throw some extra swag like bookmarks and stuff in there, auroraofficial.com is the place to go.
Yeah.
I appreciate you saying that because I'll be honest, as I was looking at the art and everything, and my children are a little bit older than
Hmm.
than you all's. Um, so we started a book club, for lack of a better term, because my kids wanted to read certain things when they were originally my eldest, my daughter was 12. She was like, I want to read Demon Hunter, and I was like, oh. Okay, I'm not as familiar with Demon Hunter as I should be, but okay. So I made a deal. I'm like, we'll buy it and then we'll read it together. So she would read it and then I'd read it and we'd go back and forth. And that's continued. I forget what we're doing now. But anyway, and so when I saw it, I was like, oh, I bet I could sell my daughter on this concept and support this. Look, this is coming out of Kentucky, and this is all of this stuff. So I'm glad you said that we can get a signed copy. You said auroraofficial.com.
Yeah, it's spelled Araura because it's not like an Aurora Borealis. Aurora is a place in the
Mhm.
story, so it's spelled a little bit differently. But yeah, like all the backgrounds and stuff you see, especially in the pilot, with the Darklands and all that kind of stuff, it's all inspired by just a trip down 127 to Mercer County. Like the rolling hills, a dead tree here and there, and like the peaks and valleys. I mean, it's all inspired by what I grew up looking at in central Kentucky, and just made it into a fantasy world.
Yeah. But so one more time, you're going to be dropping it. But if they want to go ahead and read it now, say it for us one more time, your whole website. So we just want to make sure that people have got it.
Yeah, it's auroraofficial.com.
Aurora.
Araura official.com. Yep.
Okay. All right. And what if they want your other books?
Amazon. Derelict is on Amazon. Volume 3, we're getting ready to finish. We're getting ready to get the Kickstarter versions in. Volume 3 of Aurora will be out there. And then a month after everybody has the Kickstarter version in their hand, then we're going to release it for general public. Volume 4, 5, and 6 are coming out next year. So we've already got those working as well.
I've said this on here 100 times, and James said it probably as many as well. Buy from artists. This isn't cheap. Ray's like the all of us. I meet these people. I just had somebody was met blowing up my phone a few minutes ago, going asking me questions, and what it is they think, and I get it. And some people like hiding it. I meet some of these people at shows who don't want to hide what they do for a living, right? That they want you to think that that's it. But people think that I get up on that stage and that's how I make a living. And I'm like, no, no, I would starve to death. There's some money, but I would starve to death.
Hmm.
Ray, I'm assuming you have not built a mansion in your hometown from the money
No,
you have made from your art.
no, no.
And
And
that's
you
not
do
me
it.
crapping on
It's
it. I just want people to know you pay for
no.
these things because it costs us money.
Yeah, like
Time.
when you don't have a deal and when you're just an independent person, and I wouldn't change a thing. Like um even the decision to put it on YouTube is not because we didn't have options. We just got sick of playing the waiting game and seeing how much we were going to have to give up of our rights and all that other kind of stuff on the story. And my wife was just like, we were talking about it and going over numbers, and my wife just goes, just put it on YouTube and we'll figure it out. I was like, all right, that's what we're doing. you know
Yeah.
so but yeah, when you're independent, it's all about hustling, getting out there at shows, putting in front of people, like getting off work on Friday, loading your hatchback up and driving to the show and looking as professional and polished as possible, but not being, if that makes any sense. So
Well,
yeah,
you are a
buy the
professional.
books and all that.
You've got another outlet. You've got kids. Need health insurance. It's just part of it.
Right.
There's some of us that are very lucky and who can just do these things for a living, but some of us, we still need this outlet. We're still trying to do the best we can and pay the artists,
Yeah.
buy
Yeah. I
shit.
mean, that's the thing. Like support, like support for independent projects, not just mine, but everybody out there,
Mhm.
whether they're selling art prints of their favorite stuff, or they're selling their stories, or they're selling their novels, or whatever they're doing, key rings, whatever. They do it because they're passionate about making those things, and support and people buying our stuff is like so key. I mean, we can't do it without that.
No, we can't. So, Ray, I do. And is there anything else you'd like to talk about before we go? Just any other websites you need to plug?
No, I think that's got it, man. I'm just telling everybody to go subscribe to Aurora on YouTube. It's Araura. You can find it. Where we're trying to get that just as big as we can get it. So whenever we drop that episode, a ton of people can go watch it. So
I want to tell you, if you're listening, seriously, it sounds amazing. It looks good, and the writing is damn good.
thank you. I appreciate that so much. That 8 minutes we showed in Richmond, I uploaded that to YouTube, so it's on there to watch now.
Yeah, it looks good. I didn't. I was impressed. Really was. So, you think that we tell everybody we love them? we do a little, but I was impressed with that. So, especially considering how much work. I know how much work this stuff is, and you've done a really good job.
Well, I appreciate it, man. It's been a lot. I joke with people that all my hair underneath this cap was brown when I started this 4 years ago.
No, you'd say it's that, but it's not. It's the kid. This was
Well,
this was
might
this
have a
was
little hand in it.
I just saw the picture the other day. It just came up through my Facebook feed of me holding him with a dark beard.
I remember the black beard. I remember my black beard too.
Yeah. This is doing the Reed Richards thing on the sides, but this is nope, it's gone
Yeah.
gray, gone
Mine
gray.
went from Doctor Strange to George Clooney pretty quick. So
Yeah, yeah, that's true. All right. Well, we thank you so much. Welcome back on the show anytime, and hopefully we can have you back on in a few months, and you can give us some update, and we can talk a little bit more about once it's dropped and where the next episodes are coming. Okay.
sounds great. I look forward to it.
All right. Thank you so much. It's been Bonehead.